"You filthy woman! You stepped on my gown." The words cracked through the great hall like a whip. Servants froze where they stood. A plainly dressed housemaid staggered backward, one hand rising slowly to her cheek, her face calm beneath the sting. Miss Amara Osei stood over her in gold silk and diamonds, eyes burning with disgust. The most admired woman in Ifayan society, the future bride of the crown prince. She stared down at the ashen-faced servant as though she were examining an insect beneath her heel. The maid lowered her head quietly. No tears, no apology, no trembling voice. And no one in that grand room noticed the cold power hiding in her silence. But before we continue, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time you saw this video. Tonight's story is one you will never forget. Prince Obiora entered moments later, smiling, unaware of what had just happened. Amara rushed into his arms like an angel. The slapped maid simply straightened her collar and adjusted her gloves. Then engines roared outside. 3 black SUVs bearing the golden leopard of the House of Ifayan swept through the gates and stopped beneath the portico. The chief steward of the royal household, Mr. Okafor, entered the hall, removed his cap, and bowed deeply before the humiliated maid. "Your Majesty." The room stopped breathing. What happened next destroyed lives. Queen Adjoa of Ifayan was a name spoken carefully in palaces, ministries, and boardrooms across the continent. Men who commanded armies and women who owned skylines lowered their voices when they spoke of her. Since the death of the king, her husband, she had ruled the family's empire alone. The royal estates, the shipping lines, the gold concessions, the private banks, with a calm authority no one dared challenge. Her residence, the Ivory House, stood behind high walls in the capital, its polished windows overlooking a boulevard lined with embassies and old money. Inside were marble floors, portraits of stern ancestors, crystal lamps, and corridors so quiet that even whispers seemed to behave themselves. Although powerful, Adjoa had slowly withdrawn from public life after the king's passing. Younger families knew her name and her fortune, but many had never met her face to face. They imagined a harsh old woman wrapped in black lace and bitterness. None of them knew the truth. Adjoa was elegant, disciplined, and deeply observant. She had learned long ago that the world revealed itself best when it believed no one important was watching. Her greatest devotion was her only child, Prince Obiora. Obiora was 28, broad-shouldered, warm-hearted, and handsome in the easy way that made strangers trust him at once. He had inherited his father's title and his mother's refined features, yet none of her caution. He was generous with money, kind to children, and utterly incapable of believing that beauty could hide danger. Adjoa had guided him carefully since childhood, hoping that experience would one day teach him what warnings could not. Then Miss Amara Osei entered his life. She arrived in the capital like a polished jewel. Her gowns were always perfect, her smile carefully measured, and her voice soft enough to invite attention without ever demanding it. Within months, Obiora was completely devoted. He sent flowers to her house every morning. He drove her through the city with the top down. He defended her before anyone who questioned her intentions. Society celebrated the romance as though it were already a wedding. Only Adjoa remained unconvinced. She noticed that Amara never greeted the household staff unless others were watching. At charity functions, her eyes wandered more toward diamonds than toward the suffering she claimed to pity. Her words were sweet, but something cold lived beneath them. When Adjoa tried to speak gently to Obiora, he grew irritated. "You judge her because she is young," he said one evening over roasted fish and golden rice in the blue dining room. "I judge her because I listen. You have never approved of anyone I love. You have never loved anyone worth approving." He pushed his chair back harder than he intended. "You fear losing control." The sentence struck deeper than he knew. Their conversations became strained after that. Obiora visited less often. Letters replaced dinners. The Ivory House, once filled with easy laughter between mother and son, became quiet. Then, one rainy morning, a cream envelope sealed with golden wax arrived on a silver tray. Madame Nkechi Osei, mother of Miss Amara Osei, formally requested the honor of receiving Queen Adjoa at the Golden Palm Estate in the hills outside the capital, before any engagement announcement was made. It was written with perfect manners and obvious ambition. Obiora considered the invitation proof that everything would now heal. They wish to welcome you properly, he said. No, Ades answered calmly. They wish to impress me. Or, that afternoon she sat alone in her private sitting room while her tea cooled untouched beside the fire. Beyond the windows, mist clung to the gardens. She thought of Obiora's trust, Amara's smile, and the future that waited if appearances continued untested. By evening, her decision was made. The next morning, while Obiora expected his mother to arrive later in full state, Ades dismissed her lady's maid and opened an old wardrobe herself. From it she removed the plain clothing she once wore for charitable visits to hospitals and kitchens across the realm. A dark dress without decoration, a simple apron, sturdy shoes, a modest cap to conceal her hair. She removed her rings one by one and placed them in a velvet box. When Mr. Okafor, her loyal steward, asked whether she was certain, Ades fastened the final button at her wrist and looked into the mirror. The mighty queen disappeared. In her place stood a woman no one would notice. She lifted her gloves and said quietly, "Let us see how they treat those they believe are beneath them." The Golden Palm estate stood proudly on the hillside like a woman wearing borrowed jewels. Its walls were grand, its gardens trimmed to perfection, and its long driveway curved elegantly toward tall iron gates. From a distance it appeared every inch the home of ancient nobility. Up close, the illusion weakened. The statues near the fountain were newly carved and too bright. The family crest above the entrance had been mounted only recently. The hedges were cut with such precision that they looked more expensive than natural. It was a beautiful house trying very hard to look old. At the rear gate, deliveries of flowers, meat, pastries, and wine arrived one after another. Kitchen boys ran with baskets of bread. Footmen carried silver trays until their hands reddened. Into this chaos came a modest woman in plain servant's clothes, carrying a small case. No jewels shone at her throat. No silk trailed behind her. Her hair was hidden beneath a simple cap, and her gloves were ordinary. She stood quietly at the servant's gate while rainwater clung to her sleeves. No one recognized Queen Ades. A stout housekeeper looked her over with quick disdain. "You are late." "Ah, I was told to report this morning," Ades answered softly. "Then report less and move more. We are not running a convent." She was pushed inside without another glance. The servants' corridors of the Golden Palm estate were narrow and busy. Bells rang from the drawing rooms above. Voices snapped through the halls. One maid carrying folded linen nearly collided with a footman and was cursed for her clumsiness. Another girl was scolded because a flower arrangement leaned slightly to one side. Fear moved through the house faster than air. At the center of it all was Madame Ketchi-Osei. She swept through the breakfast room in a satin gown heavy with lace, rings flashing as she pointed out everything wrong with the world. The table held smoked fish, eggs, fruit preserves, hot rolls, and silver coffee pots, yet she found reason to complain over each item. "These strawberries look common, and who arranged those lilies? Have they no eyes?" A trembling maid adjusted the flowers, and Ketchi turned to a guest list beside her plate. "By this time next month, no one of consequence will ignore our invitations." She laughed at her own words. Later, passing a half-open morning room door, Adesa heard Nkechi speaking to a neighbor. "Old noble families are finished. Titles without money are museum pieces. We are the future now." The neighbor laughed politely. Upstairs, Miss Amara Osei prepared for Obiora's arrival. Ades was sent up with fresh tea and entered quietly enough to witness the young woman before the mirror. Amara wore pale silk with pearls at her throat. Two maids pinned her hair while she practiced expressions, one after another. Warm delight, modest surprise, gentle concern. She studied each smile carefully, choosing which would best capture Obiora's heart. "Too eager," she murmured at her reflection. Then she softened her eyes and tried again. "Better." When she noticed Ades in the room, her face sharpened at once. "Set it there, and do not breathe on the tray." Ades obeyed without comment. By noon, the household was tense with expectation. Obiora was expected at any moment. Adesi was instructed to carry a silver pot of tea through the upper corridor toward the drawing room, where Amara waited. As she passed, the narrow edge of her shoe brushed the hem of Amara's gown. The sound of the slap cracked through the corridor. Gasps followed immediately. Tea rattled in its cups as Adaize staggered one step sideways, one hand rising slowly to her cheek. Red marks bloomed across skin that had once been kissed by crowned heads at formal greeting. Amara stood rigid with fury. "You wretched creature, do not touch what you could never afford." The nearby servants lowered their eyes in horror. No one dared speak. Adaize straightened carefully. She lifted her gaze to Amara's face. There was no pleading in her expression, no shame, no fear, only silence. Amara mistook it for submission and smiled coldly. "Clean the tray and be useful." She swept away in silk and perfume. The corridor remained frozen until her footsteps faded. A young maid beside the wall began to shake. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the older woman who had endured the blow without a word. "Why did you not strike her back?" she whispered. Adaize adjusted her gloves with calm fingers and picked up the trembling teacups. "Because," she said quietly, "some debts grow larger when left unpaid." By early afternoon, the rain had cleared, leaving the estate washed in pale sunlight. Gravel glittered along the drive, and the household stiffened with anticipation when the sound of an engine rolled through the grounds. A polished dark car swept to the front entrance and stopped beneath the stone portico. A footman hurried forward to open the door. Prince Obiora stepped out smiling. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, leather gloves, and the easy confidence of a man certain the world was moving in his favor. He carried a bouquet of cream roses tied with silver ribbon, chosen because Amara once claimed they were her favorite. His eyes searched the doorway before he had fully straightened. Amara appeared at once. Only moments earlier she had been complaining that the soup spoons looked cheap. Now her face glowed with warmth and her voice softened. She floated down the steps as though joy alone carried her. "Obiora," she breathed. She kissed his cheek, accepted the flowers, and thanked the servants for their hard work loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. She even touched the shoulder of a frightened maid who had been trembling since morning. "You poor dear, do rest when you can," she said sweetly. The maid nearly stared. Obiora looked at Amara with admiration so complete it bordered on worship. To him, she was kindness, beauty, refinement, and future happiness wrapped in silk. From the side corridor, Queen Adaize watched in servant dress. The sting of the slap still burned faintly on her cheek. A pale red mark remained visible beneath the edge of her cap. Obiora's eyes passed over her without recognition, without pause, without concern. That wounded her more deeply than the blow itself. She had raised him, protected him, guided him through grief and youth, yet now he could not see pain standing 2 steps away because beauty stood before him. Lunch was announced soon after. The family and selected guests gathered in the formal dining room beneath the painted ceiling. Roast goat, glazed carrots, buttered plantains, warm rolls, clear broth, and chilled custards were carried in by nervous staff. Adaize moved among them silently, serving plates and pouring wine. Obiora laughed often. Nkechi praised his manners. Amara listened to him as though no other voice mattered. When the meal ended, the men stepped toward the library for cigars, while the ladies withdrew briefly to the morning room. Obiora lingered behind to admire a carved cabinet near the hallway. In the narrow service corridor behind the room, Adaize paused when she heard voices through the half-open door. Nkechi spoke first. "The boy is simpler than I hoped. He would sign away the kingdom if asked nicely." Amara laughed lightly. "He is not foolish, merely eager to be adored. And once we are married, the ivory house must be modernized. Those dreadful portraits of dead ancestors make the place smell of judgment." Nkechi chuckled. "And the queen?" "She can be settled comfortably at the old estate in the countryside. Gardens, fresh air, endless quiet. Old women love being gently removed." They both laughed. Adaize's fingers tightened around the silver tray in her hands. Nkechi lowered her voice. "The crown jewels and the accounts?" "Gradually," Amara replied. "One does not empty a vault by kicking the door. One is handed the key." Then she added with amusement, "Men inherit thrones. Women inherit men." More laughter followed. Nkechi asked, "And if the queen opposes you?" Amara did not hesitate. "Then the old woman will learn what all old women learn, that they are replaceable." At that moment, Obiora stepped into the hall beyond the doorway. He heard only the last sentence and glanced toward the room. Inside, Nkechi had been pointing at a faded cabinet. Obiora smiled faintly, assuming they were discussing furniture. "That cabinet is dreadful. Replace it if you wish," he said as he entered. Amara rewarded him with a grateful look so tender it would have fooled a judge. Adeze closed her eyes for one brief second. Blindness, she realized, was easiest to wear when it pleased the wearer. She moved away before anyone noticed her listening. The house settled into a false calm. Guests returned to conversation. Nkechi rang for fresh tea. Obiora stood beside Amara near the tall windows, entirely content. Then, from beyond the front lawns, a new sound broke across the afternoon. Engines. Not one. Several. Heavy, powerful, approaching fast over the gravel drive. The rumble rolled across the lawns like distant thunder, drawing every eye in the house toward the tall front windows. Conversation died mid-sentence. Teacups paused halfway to lips. Even the servants froze where they stood. 3 grand black SUVs turned through the iron gates in perfect order and swept along the gravel drive. Each door bore the golden leopard crest of the House of Ifean. Uniformed drivers brought them to a smooth halt beneath the entrance portico. Nkechi Ose's face brightened at once. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and adjusted the lace at her sleeves. To her mind, this was the public recognition she had long desired. The royal household had come in full ceremony to honor the future bride. Amara touched the pearls at her throat and checked her reflection in the window glass. She smoothed the front of her gown and took Obiora's arm possessively. "How thoughtful of your mother," she said sweetly. Obiora, suddenly uneasy, said nothing. The front doors opened. 2 senior footmen entered first, followed by the royal household secretary and several uniformed attendants. Their manner was formal, controlled, and severe enough to silence the room completely. Then the chief steward, Mr. Okafor, stepped inside. He was a tall, silver-haired man whose face showed neither warmth nor impatience. He removed his gloves slowly and glanced across the room. Nkechi moved forward with a broad smile. "Mr. Okafor, what an honor. Please inform Her Majesty that—" He walked past her as though she were furniture. Nkechi's smile cracked. Amara stiffened. Mr. Okafor continued across the drawing room, past guests, past Obiora, past the marble fireplace, until he stopped before the plainly dressed servants standing near the tea service. Every eye followed him. Then he bowed deeply. "Her Majesty, Queen Adeze of Ifean." The room erupted in stunned gasps. For one moment no one moved. Then the servant who had stood unnoticed all day straightened slowly. She removed the plain cap from her head, revealing silver-streaked hair arranged with quiet elegance. She unfastened the rough outer collar, exposing the fine cut of the dark dress beneath. Her posture changed first, then the room around her. The servant vanished. Power remained. Queen Adeze of Ifean stood before them. Several servants dropped to their knees at once. One maid began to cry openly. Another crossed herself in panic. Nkechi swayed so hard she had to grip the edge of a chair. Obiora's face drained of color. Amara stumbled backward until the backs of her legs struck a sofa. Her lips parted, but no words came. Adeze lifted one gloved hand and touched the fading red mark on her cheek. Her voice, when it came, was calm enough to terrify. "Your daughter strikes with poor aim." No one in the room dared breathe. Nkechi rushed forward, hands shaking. "Your Majesty, there has been some dreadful misunderstanding." "There has," Adeze said. "You mistook breeding for costume." She turned to Mr. Okafor. "Bring forward every servant who witnessed this morning." The household staff were assembled in a trembling line near the doorway. Pale faces, clasped hands, lowered eyes. "Speak truthfully. You answer to me now." The first maid described the slap in the corridor. The second told how Nkechi had insulted the staff since dawn. A footman repeated hearing Obiora boast of controlling Amara after marriage. The housekeeper, white with fear, confessed that she had been ordered to send poorer visitors through the rear entrance, so the quality of the house remained visible. Another maid spoke through tears of hearing plans to remove the queen to a distant estate and gain access to the crown jewels and accounts. Each statement landed like a hammer. Nkechi's protests grew weaker. Amara tried to deny everything, but no one looked at her with belief anymore. Obiora stood motionless, staring first at Amara, then at the mother he had failed to recognize beneath a servant's cap. At last he stepped forward, his breathing uneven. Mother. Ah! Adais did not turn. He sank to his knees before her, shame written across every line of his face. Still she did not look at him. No one moved after Obiora fell to his knees. The great drawing room of the Golden Palm estate, so carefully prepared for triumph, now felt smaller than a prison cell. Crystal glasses stood untouched on silver trays. Tea had gone cold. The scent of lilies mixed with fear. Queen Adais regarded the room with steady eyes. "Let this be settled plainly," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet every person heard it as clearly as a bell. "The engagement between Prince Obiora and Miss Amara Osei is ended immediately." A sharp cry escaped Nkechi. Amara lurched forward. "Your Majesty, please." Adais raised one gloved hand, and the room fell silent again. "Prince Obiora will be removed for a time from all inheritance decisions and management of the royal affairs until he learns judgment equal to privilege." Obiora lowered his head further. "The Golden Palm estate," Adais continued, "stands upon debts discreetly financed through the royal banking interests. Those debts will now be called in according to contract." Nkechi's knees buckled against a chair. "And before nightfall," Adesa said, "the society papers and every gossip page in the capital shall receive an accurate account of the conduct displayed in this house today." The words struck harder than any sentence of law. In their world, scandal could close doors faster than bankruptcy. Nkechi rushed forward weeping, her pride shattered at last. "Mercy, Your Majesty. We were misjudged. We were anxious to impress. My daughter is young." "She is old enough to wound others for sport," Adais replied. Amara dropped beside her mother, tears spilling across her powdered cheeks. She reached toward Obiora first, then toward Adais when he did not move. "I loved him. I spoke foolishly. I was nervous. I did not mean any of it." No one believed tears that arrived after witnesses. Obiora rose slowly. His face looked years older than it had that morning. He stared at Amara as if seeing her for the first time, then turned to his mother. "I failed you," he said hoarsely. "I chose beauty over character. I defended lies because I wished them true." The room waited. Adais met his eyes at last. "A foolish heart may recover. A cruel one rarely does." Obiora bowed his head in shame. She turned and left the Golden Palm estate without another glance at the Osei family. Her staff followed in perfect order. Obiora walked behind them like a man attending his own funeral. The consequences arrived exactly as promised. Within days, the papers carried elegant but devastating reports of the disgrace at the Golden Palm estate. Invitations ceased. Calls were unanswered. Families who once praised Amara suddenly remembered other engagements. Shopkeepers who had extended generous credit became strict men of business. Months later, the debts were enforced. Nkechi left through the rear entrance she once reserved for others. Amara became the scandal of the season. Her name was spoken in sitting rooms with raised brows and lowered voices. Obiora returned to the ivory house under no illusion of favor. For a year, he handled the royal accounts under supervision, visited the estates in the winter rains, and worked quietly among the charities his mother supported. He learned the names of gardeners, cooks, and stable boys he once passed without notice. Pride left him slowly, but it left. The rainy season came again to the capital. In the gardens of the ivory house, white roses opened beside trimmed hedges, and gravel paths still glistened with morning dew. Queen Adais walked with the young maid who once had trembled in the corridor of the Golden Palm estate. The girl now wore a neat dark coat and carried books beneath one arm. Adais had arranged lessons in reading, numbers, and household management, along with a respectable new position in the royal household. They paused beside a fountain. "Your Majesty," said the girl softly, "after what they did, why did you show mercy to anyone at all?" Adais looked across the garden, where Obiora, sleeves rolled, was helping an elderly groundsman lift seed trays into the sun. "Because power," she said, "is not proven by how one is treated, but by how one treats others." The maid smiled. Beyond the hedges, Obiora turned as a car arrived at the front drive. A young woman stepped out carrying a basket of books for the estate school. It was the same clever maid who had seen everything on that terrible day, now dressed in a modest but fine coat. And as the capital still spoke of the fallen bride, another woman quietly entered Obiora's life. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal drama. Tell us in the comments, did Prince Obiora deserve a second chance, or was the Queen right to punish him? And let us know where you are watching from and what time you finished this story.